Good afternoon to everyone in the room. We are due to begin shortly. In fact, we're going to start now, if that's all right. And it gives me great pleasure to be discussing this fantastic topic with many of you whom I'm sure are attentively listening to the discussion at hand. And allow me to please first introduce our extremely distinguished panel of speakers for this afternoon, starting first with Ambassador Bilahari, who's a distinguished fellow of the Middle East Institute at the National University of Singapore. We also have Marty Natalegawa, who's a Minister for Foreign Affairs of Indonesia between 2009 and 2014. Tan Sri Nazir Razak, the Chair of ASEAN Business Advisory Council 2025. Deputy Secretary General Satvinder Singh of ASEAN for ASEAN Economic Community. And last but not least, of course, President Tetsuya Watanabe, who's the President of Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia. Ladies and gentlemen, these are your speakers and they are most welcome. Thank you, President. Thank you for joining us. Please join me in welcoming our speakers with a massive round of applause. Thank you very much. When I look at this panel today, I really have two words in mind that I would like to start with before moving on to the far more qualified speakers. And the first is a notion of fragmentation, and the second is the idea of regrouping. Across the world and across the region, we see the fracturing of many old alliances, as we've seen at the Munich Security Council, fracturing of supply chains and also trade at large, with disruptions induced by geopolitical conflict, including the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And yet we're also seeing the formation of new groupings, whether it be regrouping or new formulation of said organizations in a form of multilateral institutions, in a form of transnational initiatives such as the Belt and Road, such as the Build Back Better initiative proposed by President Joe Biden, and of course more recently BRICS, which is of germane relevance to this very country, so to speak. So in light of these changes, I want to just start off this discussion with a straw poll of everyone who's sitting down right now in a room. And please, if you are optimistic about the future of ASEAN in the face of these challenges and opportunities, could you please raise your hands in the room now? Who's optimistic? Wonderful. More optimism than when I was in New York, so there's that. And in terms of pessimism, who's pessimistic here in the room? Okay, fewer pessimists. Undecided or currently checking their phones? Okay, I gather that's the rest. So on that very note, thank you very much. I hope this has provided all of you here with a nice temperature check and also pulse check in the room. I'd like to begin with Ambassador Bilahari Kausikan, and that is, Ambassador, we're looking today at a pretty, shaky and also volatile world as it stands. Donald Trump's back in the White House. China and America, the strategic competition between the two powers is intensifying. And of course, there are questions inevitably about what's going on domestically or within the boundaries of ASEAN, such as the currently deeply distressing situation in Myanmar as we speak. So my question for you, Bilahari, is to what extent do you see ASEAN centrality as tenable and also viable at this day and age? And what are the biggest challenges and threats to it this year and beyond?
Thank you. ASEAN tends to talk about centrality in almost quasi-mystical, magical terms. But in its most basic sense, centrality merely means usefulness. Right? Are you useful to your members? Are you useful to your partners? And usefulness should not be confused with politeness. Just because people call you central doesn't mean they really mean it. They call you central for all kinds of reasons. Now, I'll answer my questions. Are we useful? Are we useful to our members? I think we are. I think that is well acknowledged among all members. And we should not forget that the basic purpose of ASEAN is to manage relations among its members. External relations is a secondary function of ASEAN. Now, when we talk about the external relations, however, I think we have to admit we are somewhat less useful, which doesn't mean we are useless than we were in the past. And why is this so? I think the reason is actually essentially very simple. ASEAN has not adapted quickly enough, expeditiously enough to the changes in our strategic environment. I won't go into those changes. You have made a quick summary of them. But why have we failed to adapt quickly enough? I think that's the more important point. I think first of all, we have to acknowledge that this is essentially our own responsibility. It's our fault, to put it this bluntly. And I think there are two reasons for this. The first reason is there is a certain complacency that's crept into ASEAN due to our past successes. You know, as they say in the financial industry, past performance is no guarantee of future performance. We should be well advised to remember that. But secondly, and I think more to the point, ASEAN has always privileged form over substance to some degree. That can't be helped because it's inherent in the nature of the organization, the nature of the decision-making processes, because our most basic consensus is always to have some kind of consensus. But of late, I think this has gone a little bit too far. Too much of what ASEAN does is become performative rather than policy-oriented. You mentioned Myanmar. Myanmar is a good example of that, and we can go into that later. I don't want to get diverted. But much of our economic agenda is performative, unfortunately. We are very fond of talking of ASEAN as a market of 700 million people, right? The fact is we are still 10 markets, largely. We have aspirations, but we are very good at making plans, less good at implementing. Why performative? I think the very fundamental reason, and I was reminded of this reason when I listened to Pak Bodiono this morning, giving this quick history of Indonesia's economic development, and when he pointed out that the most dramatic advances were made during the new order, Suharto's new order, right? The fact is, the politics of all major ASEAN countries have become more complicated these days than in the 60s, the 70s, even the 80s, or even the 90s. It's become much more complicated. It's harder to get domestic consensus, and therefore it's harder to get regional consensus. And therefore we have not adapted faster enough. And therefore a lot of what we do has become performative to keep the idea of consensus alive rather than actually do things. I'm going to end now. I don't want to take up too much time. Now, that doesn't mean I am pessimistic about ASEAN. I'm not, because I think in its basic purpose of managing intra-Southeast Asian relations, it does a pretty good job, and it will continue to do a pretty good job. We need to do a better job in adapting to the external environment if we are going to remain central or useful, right? But I think in order to do that, we also should not make a fetish of this idea of centrality. That's why I prefer now to use the word useful. It's a much more mundane term, right? And it focuses the mind on practical things rather than metaphysical concepts. ASEAN is a very important instrument of the foreign policies of all of its member states. But it is one instrument in a toolkit of instruments. We shouldn't think it is a solution to all our problems. In fact, there is an old Indonesian slogan that has gone out of fashion, but I think should be brought into fashion because it focuses our attention on an essential part. National resilience leads to regional resilience, and regional resilience enhances national resilience. It has to belong with each member state. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Bilahari. I would now like to turn to Tan Sri Nazir Razak. Now, obviously, a key critique that's been advanced just then, by Bilahari is the concern of performativity, that you have of emphasis on form and not so much on substance and delivery. This year, Malaysia will be chairing and proceeding over the ASEAN and its year of chairmanship, so to speak. And of course, as the chairman of ASEAN BAC, you yourself have many thoughts, I'm sure, on the implications of Malaysia's year of chairmanship for businesses, for investments, and also developments across the board in the region of the individual member economies. How can we ensure that this year does not go to waste in terms of delivering usefulness for the member states and member economies of ASEAN, in your view, on a part of Malaysia? Thank you, Tan Sri.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Let me just start by commenting on what Ambassador said. I mean, I agree on this word performative, and actually, I'm somewhat bruised and battered by years of working within ASEAN. In my previous life, I basically tried to build a regional banking group called CIMB. And yes, a lot was achieved, but we did it because ASEAN said we were going to be an ASEAN economic community by 2015. So we all got dressed up with nowhere to go, basically, because the free movement of skilled labor, free movement of capital, free movement of goods and services and all that didn't come through. Yeah, let me just say that. But, however, when I look at the situation today, I am optimistic. I put up my hand because I actually think that three things are going very much in our favor. Firstly, I think the geopolitics or the decoupling, US-China, going into our favor. We know the story. Secondly, I have never seen a convergence of internationalist leaders as what we have today, from Anwar to Prabowo to Lawrence to Marcos to Hun Manet. They're all internationalists, basically. So I am optimistic because of that. And the third reason is that having been through what we've been through, I think ASEAN knows what its limitations are. Yeah. So one key ways of being successful is make sure you set your expectations right. Yeah. Don't try like in 2007, we want to be EU, so we promise you this is what's going to happen. But so it was never achievable. So today, with that, we understand what are the limits of ASEAN. So in our chairmanship year, 2025, Malaysia hopefully will move the dial on regional integration. I will talk about the economic side, obviously. In the economic side, on the ASEAN BAC level, what we have introduced various proposals to the governments, and I have had the fortune of working on this for over 2 years already. I was appointed appointed to council during Arshad's chairmanship. So I saw how it worked, and the first thing I thought myself is, we've got to be ready before we become chairman. So all my work is ready. I will present this for the first time to the economic ministers next week in Johor. And one of the biggest and most important elements, there's 12 of them, I can't talk about them all today, but the most important recommendation I'm making is this notion of an ASEAN business entity. What is it? This is it. It is basically saying, we cannot achieve free movement of people, we cannot achieve free movement of goods and services and capital and all that at the national level. We cannot. But at the same time, we want ASEAN to be this market of 700 million people. We always boast about fourth largest economy in the world, fifth largest economy in the world, 700 million people. The reality, we're 10 fragmented markets. So how do we square the circle? Well, we tell people, if you come to ASEAN, if you are endorsed as an ASEAN business entity, then we will give you the flexibilities at the corporate level. Yeah, so assumption is that, for instance, if Indonesia says CIMB Niaga is an ASEAN business entity, then CIMB Niaga at the corporate level, CIMB can bring people from Malaysia, from Thailand to Indonesia freely. Yeah, CIMB can then outsource its operations to other countries freely. So we achieve economies of scale of operations for businesses. And this will be very good for ASEAN. And here I think it's an innovative way of getting around the limitations of ASEAN. Yeah, so that's the most important project we want to do today. There are many others. I won't go into them, but I just wanted to maybe stop at that and come back later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dan Sri. Turning now over to you, Deputy SG. We've heard from the two panelists so far that in some ways ASEAN operates just like 10 separate and also individualized markets. In other ways and respects, these markets are seeking to come together, seeking to build more synergy and integration. Externally, of course, there's reshoring, friendshoring, all sorts of supply chain shifts that have seen a drastic transformation of the supply chain paradigm relative to, say, 10 to 20 years ago. So on your end, what are the priorities for you this year with regards to economic and trade integration? Can you say a bit more on that, especially in view of ongoing developments with RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership?
Thank you. I think to me, I'm in the middle of the ASEAN Economic Community engagement and integration in ASEAN. And I think on the political side, I can understand where Ambassador Bilahari comes from. But actually from the economic point of view, I think the progress that we have made in regional integration, I think there are very few economic blocs in the world that can emulate what we have had. I mean, put European Union aside. Today in ASEAN, we negotiate our economic agreements with the rest of the world as a single bloc and is legally binding. And if you look at us in 2018, 2019, when the rest of the world was protectionist in its mindset, borders were closed, our ministers took the opportunity to finish the negotiation on RCEP, and we created the largest FTA in the world with some of our largest trading partners, involving Japan, Korea, Australia, China, and New Zealand. And today is fully ratified, and this is an ASEAN-led effort that brought this entire amazing ecosystem into one marketplace. And I think we are benefiting from that. Not only that, today we have just finishing negotiating our upgrade of our FTA as a bloc with China, upgrading it. And we're in the process this year of trying to also substantially negotiate one with India, ASEAN and India. So if there's one thing that actually binds us at the centrality part is open markets. We believe in prosperity, we believe in the multilateral global system, and we are basically today one of the biggest champions of that. And if you look at our growth, with an average of 4.5, 4.6 to 5% for the last 5 years, and we anticipate the same type of growth from now to 2030, we are quite confident that we are going to be, in the next couple of years, we are going to move from being from 5th largest GDP in the world, we are going to grow to the 4th largest GDP in the world. Already in the last 3 years, we are the largest recipient of FDI in the world, other than the United States. In the developing world, we are the largest economic bloc in terms of FDI. And to me, it's a recognition of our relevance. It's a recognition of our usefulness, is what ambassadors say. We are beginning to show to the world that we are able to come together to create an ecosystem and rules of engagement that's relevant to the world. And in fact, this year, under Malaysia's chairmanship, as Tan Sri has mentioned, Malaysia has big plans to release this year. One of the big outcomes is going to be, we are upgrading our regional FTA called ARTIGA. And in it, for the first time in the world, we are going to have abilities for us. For example, we are fighting to get negotiators to put in circularity elements into our FTA, the first time. Even at WTO level, it's going to be very tough to get that done even the next decade. But we in the region, we are preparing ourselves, looking at global supply chains and trying to understand what's going to be important to large OEMs. Today, they all need to be a lot more circular. 40% of their supply chain has to be recycled. And we are preparing our region, our economic foundations to be ready to support such activities. I think these are the fundamental, what I call practical and common appreciation among all member states in ASEAN, where we are getting ourselves ready for that. Now, besides the goods agreement upgrade, besides our agreements with all of our, within ASEAN and our external partners, I'm sure all of you also have heard, we are also trying to negotiate at this stage one of the largest digital economic agreements that will again integrate and bind our region. Again, these are for the first time, and by the way, it's going to be a legally binding agreement, not just a general voluntary agreement with member states. So to me, I think on the economic side, we are showing the world that we are relevant. We are showing to the world that we are willing to transform and integrate further. And what I call the the outcomes are also quite clear. Today, in fact, in the world, we are the third largest economic trading bloc as a collective. That's significant, I must tell you. Our trade, total trade, is almost the same size as our GDP of the region. GDP is at 3.8 trillion. Our total trade is 3.5 trillion. And the largest component of our trade, standing at 21.5%, is intra-ASEAN trade. It shows you that the efforts that we are making integrating in our region is paying off. Okay, but at the same time, we are very different from the European Union. European Union trade is only 1/5 of their GDP, by the way, yeah? And 60%, of course, they do a lot of intra-European trade. But I don't think we want to be like the European Union. We are different. We also trade a lot with the rest of the world. While our trade in the region is the largest component and growing healthily, our trade with the rest of the world is also growing healthily. So I think we are really positioning ourselves to be ready, to be relevant. In fact, while the rest of the world is looking on the protectionist challenges that are coming from, from the West, especially led by the US. But in Asia, in ASEAN, we are really wanting to push our leadership and ensure that the multilateral open trade remains, and we can see that our fortunes and the wellness of our people is going to lie in our ability to succeed in this.
Thank you, Deputy SG. When listening to your remarks, a few words sort of were particularly conspicuous. Ecosystem, leadership, circularity. These words also behove me to now turn the floor over to you, President Watanabe-san, because fundamentally these are words that are highly germane to the renewable transition and a drive towards more sustainability in the face of the climate crisis that we see today. And with America pulling out of the Paris agreements for the second time under President Donald Trump, I think a question that many in the room would inevitably have is, what do you see to be the potential for ASEAN to exert greater leadership in supporting and advancing a truly circular and sustainable ecosystem building effort? Do you see that as something that ASEAN can do? And if so, what are the concrete measures and also steps that could be undertaken going forward? Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. First, your point of the U.S. withdrawal from the Paris Agreement and the new, version 2 administration in the U.S. But I think Trump version 2 is, sort of a global new normal. So we have to live with that. And we saw what happened under the first administration. So, and I think decarbonization effort in ASEAN and other parts of the world, especially in this developing Asia, decarbonization is now embedded in corporate strategy and the supply chain, the market. So, of course, U.S. may have announced the withdrawal from the Paris Agreement, but it will not derail ASEAN and Asia's net zero ambitions and efforts. Instead, it is maybe an opportunity for the region to lead, setting the rules and the agenda for sustainable development. I think ASEAN centrality, I'm an outsider, but coming from a dialogue partner, but this is where the ASEAN centrality, a key element of regional security and Asia's multilateral cooperation, can be deployed to ensure that Asia's future is not dictated predominantly by great powers' unilateral actions, regardless of global shifts and some of the action taken by the superpowers. ASEAN must take ownership of its energy transition and use its central position to drive collective action in this region, especially critical area of decarbonization. And turning back to the reality of ASEAN, I think DSG mentioned that ASEAN is to become a fourth largest economy, 5% GDP growth, 8% for Indonesia. So the growth comes with a surging energy demand. So does CO2 emission. And, and also reality in ASEAN is that ASEAN cannot afford to shift entirely to renewables overnight. With a growing economy and rising energy needs, fossil fuel, coal and gas will remain a critical part for certain period of time. That's a reality. So the use of every available technology to reduce emissions of CO2 will be critical. CCUS, ammonia, hydrogen, co-firing. These kind of technology are now becoming available. And also, another key challenge in ASEAN in this effort is diversity. So Indonesia maybe a power mix of 70% of power mix is rely on the fossil fuel, but for example, Cambodia already renewable is 40%. So in this regard, I think regional cooperation are critical. So in order to attract investment and the foreign direct investment, Japanese, Chinese, or Koreans, and US and Europe, they have technology and experience, and they are looking at this region for their investment, especially in the energy transition area. So regional integration of energy market is critical for ASEAN. And ASEAN Power Grid, it's maybe difficult, it's a bit challenge, but it, as a long-term goal, region needs to have such kind of a vision and long-term goal for the investors have a prediction for their investment decision. The same is true regional carbon market. It's a, I think price structure needs to be changed. Otherwise, investment in the new technology will not happen. Sorry, I stop here.
Thank you very much. Thank you, President. You know, central to your remarks just then is the observation that ASEAN needs to build partnerships with a range of countries and parties, not just China and US, but also the Gulf and the GCC, the European Union, Latin America, Central Asia, and beyond. And now turning to Pak Marty, you know, you're one of the most distinguished diplomats Indonesia has ever produced. And my question for you is, in the age of Donald J. Trump 2.0, where countries are increasingly feeling the squeeze from not just the US, but also China, to choose sides, to take sides, you know, how can ASEAN rise above the fray and maintain a degree of strategic neutrality or agency, if you will? And specifically, where do you see Indonesia's role amidst all of this in relation to ASEAN, and when not Indonesia can exhibit leadership and step up to play a more prominent role in steering ASEAN through the times that we live in, or maybe that's not the point or the purpose of ASEAN membership. So I now turn over to you for your thoughts and remarks. Thank you, Pak Marty.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. And I really enjoyed listening to other colleagues' views and thoughts. I thought they were very profound, and I especially like Pak Bilahari's interpretation of centrality as defined as essentially as being usefulness of ASEAN. I think that's a very honest way of benchmarking ASEAN's progress. On the most recent developments in the United States, my own personal inclination is that we don't wish to further inflate the sense of self-importance, whether the person concerned or the country concerned, by being too overly preoccupied with the coming and goings in one specific capital, in this case, in Washington, D.C., however important it is. Because ASEAN has, over its nearly 60 years of existence, have dealt with many difficult and constantly changing dynamics. And in facing those changing dynamics and difficult situations, one of the qualities that places us in good stead has been our capacity to define our own interests, our own collective wish and vision for the future, and not to simply be facilitated and be reactive to changing environment. So I would say that in the current context, and looking at how today, for instance, Europe is grappling with the dramatic changes in US policies in Ukraine, for instance, I think it's very well advised for ASEAN member states, not in a too megaphone way, but internally between ourselves, try to identify where our exposures are, where our vulnerabilities are vis-a-vis changing dynamics, and ensure that we have resilience to deal with those changing dynamics. Because geopolitical competition is a fact of life. By the way, it's not a new phenomenon. ASEAN has been extremely skilled in the past and very agile in dealing with changing dynamics. But what is perhaps new nowadays is that the manifestation of geopolitical dynamics goes far beyond political security issues. It intrudes into economics, sociocultural, technology. That is why I'm not one of those, I'm not especially keen in overemphasizing there is the economic domain, there is a political security domain, as if the economy is fine. Perhaps ASEAN has been too efficient in suggesting the notion of three separate pillars, when the reality of today's world is precisely how these issues interconnect. The type of concerns that we have today are not really pure economic-driven disruptions. They are a case of geopolitics imposing economic domains. So geopolitics matter. All of us in this room who are captains of industries and leaders of businesses, we must try to identify where our exposures are, vulnerabilities to these geopolitical situations. So I hope under Malaysia's very able chairmanship in the months ahead, we do our homework in the sense of not wanting to be caught by surprise. President Trump's policies are well defined and well known. We need to have a vision or a script in dealing with that. But at the same time, like I said at the beginning, I'm not one of those who wish to give an overinflated sense of importance to one changing situation. We must know what we wish to achieve, first and foremost, rather than be too preoccupied with the coming and goings elsewhere. But a sense of ASEAN solidarity is very important, I think. We cannot be a la carte in our approach. I gather, for instance, that two ASEAN member states that may be particularly vulnerable to changes in US policies would be Thailand and Vietnam, given their healthy trade surplus with the United States. What can ASEAN, for instance, as a 10, how can we have a good conversation on this? I am not a pessimist by nature, optimist, but I am beginning to think that we have to be extremely careful, that I am beginning to sense a delineation or distinction between, on the one hand, the growing importance of Southeast Asia, without doubt. Southeast Asia as a region, individually as economies, are becoming increasingly important, and the importance of ASEAN, because it used to be taken as one and the same thing. When you speak of ASEAN, you're speaking of Southeast Asia. But increasingly, I find that countries are able to speak of the growing importance of Southeast Asia, or even of individual Southeast Asian economy, without necessarily paying homage to ASEAN as a collective organization. I think in the privacy of our own internal conversation, we have to be a bit more blunt and honest that more of the same may not be good enough for the next 60 years.
Thank you so much, back Marty. You've pointed out the dangers of thinking in silos and the dangers of overcrediting individual actors and then attributing to them outsized impacts and what's going on here in terms of current dynamics. I want to just test, what you said there in the context of the South China Sea, where many here in the room are captains of industries, and you might be alarmed by or concerned by escalating temperatures and tensions to some extent, altercations and clashes between the Chinese and the Philippines. It strikes me that the South China Sea is a perfect test for ASEAN, and you've always had to grapple with it. It's nothing new. In your view, do you foresee any major flashpoints, or do you have any tips for business representatives here in the room concerning the situation in the South China Sea? And if so, what's the takeaway for us all here?
Well, we don't have a crystal ball. We have no way of knowing how things will develop. But at the same time, we are comforted by the fact that decades ago, long before the issue of South China Sea came to the fore, leaders of ASEAN of that vintage had the foresight to come to initiate the process of ASEAN-China dialogue, the declaration of conduct on the South China Sea, etc., whose benefit or whose potential we continue to have in front of us. So I think, personally, it is incumbent for current generation of ASEAN leaders to actually deploy and employ those modalities, because otherwise they become dormant, and then we have, again, a la carte approach where there is no sense of ASEAN cohesion on the matter of the South China Sea. But certainly, I think, if you think about, in my view, putting aside all the various technical discussions about code of conduct, etc., this is a moment for ASEAN leaders with China to reflect and think, is it really in their interest to instill even more, to allow the situation to develop into open conflict? I think both China and ASEAN collectively have been beneficiaries of the long peace that we have enjoyed in our region, the peace dividend we have enjoyed. And I think the leaders of ASEAN, when they meet in Kuala Lumpur and with China later on in the year, they should instruct their officials, not instruct, perhaps they shouldn't simply delegate responsibility. They should take leadership, exercise leadership, and to say whatever is going on in the South China Sea, the use of force is not something that we wish to entertain. Peaceful settlement of disputes. And if we don't have the wisdom just now to solve the problem, let's not do any more harm. Stabilize the situation and ensure that perhaps future generation will have the necessary wisdom to solve the problem. But it requires leadership, and I know that this is a quality that Malaysia, through its prime minister, has an abundance of in the year ahead.
Thank you very much. I'm going to now turn it over to you, Ambassador Bilahari, because you have been a firm and eloquent advocate of ASEAN realism, of ASEAN being more realistic about the perils and dangers of overexpansion, and also being more, sober about the risks and not sort of delude themselves into thinking that the world is Pollyannish and whatnot. We've talked a lot about the risk coming from the US side in terms of protectionism and President Trump, but I want to talk about the Sino-ASEAN relationship, because I think this is a relationship that you've written repeatedly and thoughtfully about over many, many years. What do you see as the major or the most substantial opportunities and challenges for the relationship between China and ASEAN, and what tips would you give to industry captains in dealing with China, so to speak?
Okay, I'll answer your question, but before that, let me just add a couple of thoughts to support what Marty just said. I think the world, unless you've been living under a rock, it cannot have escaped anybody's notice that the world has become a more uncertain place. But these uncertainties are not new, as Marty said. They are what the late Donald Rumsfeld called known unknown. We have actually navigated far worse in Southeast Asia, all of us, collectively and individually, in our lifetime, right? And here we are still here. So I think a certain psychological poise is necessary in approaching these uncertainties. Secondly, I think, one of the uncertainties, of course, is the new US administration. But I think we should, again, approach this with a certain degree of calm. Europe has been completely discombobulated because they deceived themselves to thinking that they could deal with the US on the basis of common value. We have never in Southeast Asia, either nationally or collectively, had that particular issue. We have always dealt with the US, with China, with Japan, with any country, on the basis of common interest. And that is, I would submit to you, is an approach that is much more appropriate to the kind of uncertainties we face now, not just vis-a-vis with US, but vis-a-vis China, India, all major powers. It's a matter of, therefore, calmly calculating your interests. Where are your liabilities? Where are your assets? Does the sums come out right? If they do come out right, then we do something. If they don't, then we try something. Now, with that said, I think all of us face two fundamental realities. You can't deal with China and US separately. You have to deal with them simultaneously, and dealing with them simultaneously is the necessary condition with dealing with either of them effectively. That's another way of saying that the foundation of any kind of regional organization, the foundation of any kind of regional cooperation, is a stable balance of power. Right? And that balance of power will entail us working with the US and China concurrently, and not just the US and China, but doing what we have always done, having what you could call an omnidirectional foreign policy. We can work with the US on issue A that does not preclude us working with China on issue B, or with Japan on issue C, or with India on issue D. We will work with whoever can advance our interests nationally and collectively. And as Marty said, that requires you to have a very clear, whole-blooded, clinical sense of what your interests are, your national interests and your regional interests, and defining your national interests with your regional interests in mind. They are not totally separate. So I think we can deal with China, we can deal with the US, we can deal with any country, but we need that sense, which Marty very eloquently described, and I'm trying to supplement in a different way.
Thank you very much, Bilahari. Turning over to you, Deputy Secretary General, the simultaneity or simultaneous engagement as a prerequisite for effective engagement is a point that Bilahari raised just then. And yet, increasingly in ASEAN, some commentators are concerned about the emergence of a two-track ASEAN, where you have more economically developed and growing and also vibrant economies on one hand, and then there are also economies that are struggling and in some ways left behind due to domestic malaise, political instability, and in the case of one country, civil strife and war. So as a key leader within the Secretariat, what do you foresee to be the primary solutions or remedies to the increasing stratification, the widening divergence between those who are doing very well and those who are struggling in ASEAN? Is this something that we ought to be concerned about? What do you reckon?
So you're right. So it's a combination of economies. We have LDCs in the ASEAN together with more developed economies, the tail end in Singapore, Malaysia. So I would say that has not been, that has been the norm of how we have come together, and that spirit of working together to be able to pull everyone together, to go together as a team, that has prevailed massively from the beginning and even today. I think I'll give you an example. I've just shared on the Digital Economic Framework Agreement, the DEFA agreement. I think logically, you can imagine when we first put out the idea to the 10 countries that this is what we want to do, you'll imagine the LDCs probably putting up their hands to say that, oh, wow, this is not really good for me because I'll be left behind. The developed economies are going to benefit more than me. But actually, on the reality, when we actually did a deep study from consultants in the initial the thinking phase of whether we should proceed with this digital agreement and what will be the benefit to the region, when we actually did the actual study, it took us 8 months. 2,000 respondents, academics, you name it, everything was put together, the regulators. What we found was the biggest per capita benefit from the DEFA would be benefited by the LDCs, not Singapore, not Malaysia, not Thailand. And we brought this data in front, the entire grouping of ministers. The LDCs ministers were practical. They saw the money on the table. They say, wow. And that's why today we are in the process of negotiating the largest digital agreement in the world. So in ASEAN, we work in a very practical way. We try to make it in a very inclusive way. We are pushing and doing things. Even when negotiating this agreement, it's not an easy agreement, legally binding agreement. We are also practical. We are even, right now, as we are negotiating, we are realizing we need to maybe even embrace a pathfinder way. In a sense, there might be more advanced economies who are willing to throw in their commitments earlier and then give the LDCs a little bit more time before coming on board. So this has been the ways in which we have worked in an inclusive way to ensure that no one is left behind and the interest of the region is put forward. You know? So, and I think this spirit has always been embedded in ASEAN, and honestly, I've sat through the meetings of the economic ministers, the finance ministers. There is so much commonality. All of them believe in one thing, which is they want economic growth and development for their people. They want prosperity. So that is what binds a lot of decision making and brings unity to us.
Thank you very much. Tan Sri, Nazir, we've heard a lot from the governmental and intergovernmental perspective thus far today. But given that the many in the room are indeed from the industry, you're an incredibly seasoned and veteran financial and corporate leader in your own right in ASEAN. What advice would you give to folks who are trying to navigate this new normal of geopolitical uncertainty, where it's no longer possible to say there's economics, there's business, and then there's politics? But these days, all of these risks and also technological risks are compounding one another. It's very hard to imagine a world where silos can still be maintained, given what we said earlier on. So what's your tip and advice for folks in the room in face of these calamities and challenges?
Well, for businesses, a lot of what's going on is beyond our pay grade, to be honest. And we need to focus on what we can do. And let me just backtrack a bit. I mean, I think so far as what's going on globally with the, rising walls, if you like. I mean, when people raise walls, we build bigger negotiating tables, right? I think that's one approach that Malaysia is taking. And this year, we're going to have the first ASEAN GCC summit in the region. And I think that's a very important point. We're also going to have a specific China engagement. And I think hopefully in November, everyone will come together. Two is, I think we're very focused on maintaining ASEAN unity. That's crucial. And three is, we're looking at ways to create value. And here, I think, is where the kind of rubber hits the road. I mean, I was listening to many of the sessions this morning, and it's interesting to talk about Indonesia's high growth trajectory and plans. But unfortunately, this morning, there wasn't so much said about how ASEAN plays into that. Yeah, and I think it's very important that we put it out there. That I think that I think there's a lot of value that ASEAN can bring to all the countries, and Indonesia in particular. And I really hope that today, I mean, I had a bit of deja vu. In 2008, I sat at a panel, something like this, and I asked a leading Indonesian businessman, said, are you pro-ASEAN integration? And he is one of the top businessmen still. And he said to me, to me, Nazir, ASEAN integration is about other countries eating my breakfast. Yeah, he was very anti the notion of opening up for ASEAN. And I hope that sentiment has changed, because I really think that, this 100 to 150 billion FDI that Indonesia required, a lot of that can come from ASEAN. I really think that if ASEAN is successful, Indonesia will be the center of ASEAN. I think, if you're foreign international companies, you'd want to be headquartered in the 200 million market of the 700 million size economy. And I think that it's very important for the ASEAN BARC perspective and the many initiatives we're trying to do to move the dial, that Indonesian businesses and other businesses in the region step up and do their part in sort of saying, yes, we want that to be done. I mean, politicians respond to popular voices. And if we stand up and say, look, that ABE is the way to square the circle about how we get integration, how we get economies of scale in the region, then I'd like to see businesses step, really, I'd like to hear everybody's voice and say, we support that. And businesses, sometimes they get so bogged down in their day-to-day making money and all that, and they forget that this kind of collaboration to change policy actually will mean a lot to your individual business as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tan Sri. And I'm going to ask the final question before I open up the floor to audience questions. So please start preparing your questions if you have any. But this is a question on my part for President Watanabe. And that is, in an interview that was conducted with you by Nikkei around 1 year and a bit ago, you mentioned the possibility for closer Japanese-ASEAN ties and Japan-ASEAN collaboration in tackling the challenges of climate change and undertaking the renewable transition. And my question is, where lies Japan in relation to ASEAN centrality over the coming 5 to 10 years? We've now got a new Prime Minister in power, Prime Minister Ishiba-san in Japan. And to what extent do you see ASEAN as top of mind for his cabinet and also foreign policy at large? Thank you, President.
Thank you very much. I'm obviously Japanese, but I'm working for the international organization located headquartered here in Jakarta, Indonesia, so I'm not entitled to speak about Japan. But your point of Japan-ASEAN collaboration, especially on the decarbonization and supply chain and others. And I think here technology is key, especially ASEAN's effort toward decarbonization. As I mentioned earlier, that many technologies, CCUS, hydrogen, ammonia, and co-firing, energy efficiency tools. But here, I think real challenge lies in the scaling and deploying these technologies effectively. This is where Japan and ASEAN collaboration becomes essential. Japan's strength, especially in low-carbon innovation, in cutting-edge technology and decades of experience in this field. And ASEAN, on the other hand, brings a youthful population, growing economy, and increasing demand for energy solutions. Our collaboration between ASEAN and Japan must focus on leveraging these complementary strengths to create win-win solutions, accelerating decarbonization, while supporting economic growth that is necessary for this region. And you mentioned the Japanese Prime Minister. Yes, new Japanese Prime Minister had a very successful meeting with new President of Indonesia and bringing many investors, Japanese businesses. So that will kick off a new collaboration, a new partnership between Japan and ASEAN, especially on the decarbonization and energy transition area. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And we now have time to open up the floor to at least 2 questions. If you'd like to ask a question, please raise your hands tall and high so I can recognize you. And I'm sure that there'll be a microphone coming around to you shortly. I hope there is, at least. Okay. I recognize a hand over there. And is there anyone else who'd like to ask a question? Is that a hand over there? I can't really see anything. Okay. I apologize. All right. So there's a hand over there. Can we get a microphone over to that gentleman over there, please? Can anyone... Is there a microphone? If there's no, okay, there's a microphone on its way. So sort of traversing half of the room to get to you. All good. Wonderful. Please direct your question, ideally, to one of the panelists, and I would invite others to supplement if appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Samuel Jose. Previously, I worked for the Ministry of Maritime Affairs and Investment, but I'm currently asking now my question in my individual capacity. So to His Excellency Pak Marty Natalegawa, Pak Marty, I think Trump 2.0 has definitely posed risks to supply chain stability in the region, tariff, especially, Trump has threatened some of the countries aligned with BRICS, and Indonesia right now is marching forward to both BRICS and OECD. So I think in your own personal opinion, Pak Marty, is there any vulnerabilities also from Indonesia's and Malaysia's accession to BRICS, to the ASEAN region? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other question before I yield the floor to Pak Marty? No? Okay. So, Pak Marty, thank you.
I didn't quite catch the full question, but I assume it's something to do with BRICS and Trump. Or is any of it? Well, I hope that question had been considered by the people who make the initial decision, because the timing of Indonesia's entry to BRICS is certainly interesting, because we joined BRICS precisely at a time when there is a prospect, at least in terms of rhetoric, coming from DC, from President Trump, that the member states of BRICS will be imposed certain tariffs by the United States. But as I said before, I don't think our policy should be driven by the threats or the suggestions of others. I hope my understanding would be that the Indonesian government, when it did decide to join BRICS, they would have gone through all the pros and cons of the benefits or otherwise of joining such an organization. What I'm a little bit perplexed about is the suggestion that I get the point that us becoming members of BRICS is another way of a representation or manifestation of our presence globally in various forums, our engagement in various platforms and processes. What I'm a little bit perplexed on, not quite there yet, is the often expressed suggestion that the BRICS represent the global South. Because traditionally, Indonesia has been at the forefront, shaping and molding debate and discussions on the so-called global South. We are commemorating 70 years of the Bandung Conference this year. We have been at the forefront in shaping and molding the non-aligned movement, the G77, and China. It's difficult for me to fully digest the suggestion that countries such as Russia and China and BRICS, within BRICS, is now the torchbearer for the global South. I think it's incumbent for Indonesia to demonstrate more ambition than simply be making up the number of a pre-existing organization. BRICS, as I understand it, is made up of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And the name will always, as I understand it, be such. It's almost like ASEAN Plus. So I hope, while again becoming a member of BRICS and fully utilizing its benefits, we do not parcel out our own leadership capacity in shaping and molding the Global South agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Deputy Secretary General?
If I could also take a slice of the question, and on the economic side, maybe let me share with you how, from the ASEAN side, we are also watching. Obviously, the tariffs is the new thing. Tariff is not new; it's been around, right? The tariff fear has always been inflicting the whole world, right? And to us, before tariff, it was bifurcation, right? The bifurcation between China and the U.S. And that is real, and it's been happening for the last almost half a decade. And to us as a region, I think while we can sit and be pessimist about it, but if we also look at it from the opportunistic point of view, actually ASEAN has been one of the biggest beneficiaries of bifurcation. And if you look at the numbers, we have seen 600% growth of FDI from the US in the last 2 years in ASEAN, 600%, in manufacturing, by the way. And that shows you that if we, like what Ambassador Bilahari said, if we become useful, if you are relevant, there's opportunity for us. So I think this is not a time for businesses to sit there and be pessimistic, but to see how you make yourself relevant and how the region can come together to be useful. And to me, it's not just about bifurcation or tariffs. There's the other effect that we also have to watch, which is decarbonization. And we are beginning to see that today, large OEMs need to do circularity. They need to recycle 40% of their value chain. You know, the old models where they used to take resources from our region and then send to China for processing, and then it goes on to the developed world. That kind of a modular is no longer relevant. The global financial system will not reward you. They want to see a lower carbon footprint in terms of their global supply chain. And we are the net beneficiaries of that because a lot of resources come from our region. And we do see that in the coming year, and already we are seeing the numbers in terms of FDI. A lot more of the OEMs, not just the West, who are thinking of China Plus One strategies, but even the Chinese organizations are now reorganizing their supply chains, bringing in a lot more value-add activities in our region in order to be able to then lower their carbon footprint, but at the same time also become relevant operating out of our ecosystem. So I think it's really the ability for us to be nimble, to be effective, to be useful. And I think tariffs itself, I mean, you know, when you look at the numbers in our region, we are nowhere close to the kind of surpluses that China or Mexico or what other economies may have. I think while we do, some of our economies do have surpluses, but I think we are not in the same league and game. And by the way, as a region, I think it will still be very useful to see how we take up the pie of the global share and then make ourselves relevant and competitive. So to me, it's good for us also to focus our energies on the opportunity side, and we have done that, especially on the bifurcation issues and on sustainability issues. And I think we have kind of achieved pretty good, decent result from that, and we'll see more of that coming.
Thank you very much. We're now coming up to the end of this very wonderful panel session. Can I just do a very quick show of hands? To those of you in the room who are optimistic about the future of ASEAN, please raise your hands now. Thank you. I think we have swung some of them. And to those who are pessimistic about the future, please raise your hands. No peer pressure. Wonderful. So on that very note, I believe the panel has indeed more than accomplished what it did not set out to achieve, but has inadvertently achieved with a wonderful persuasion and eloquence of all of our speakers. Thank you. Please give our fantastic speakers once again a round of applause. Ambassador Bilahari, Kausikan, Tan Sri Nazir Razak, Deputy Secretary General Satvinder Singh, President Watanabe, and Bapak Marty Natalegawa. These are your speakers, and they are most welcome. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Let's give a big round of applause, and thank you, Brian Wong, to lead that panel session, the very last for the day. And we'll invite all speakers and moderators to kindly move 1 or 2 steps forward. Yes, please. And of course, we have token of appreciation as well to all of the speakers and moderator. And for this, let's invite IBC CEO, Mr. Sofian Jalil, to deliver the token of appreciation. So today we have covered many aspects that will comprise how Indonesia will reach higher economic growth and prosperity, from priorities for economy and strategies for a prosperous Indonesia, and we tied it into inclusive economic growth with zero poverty, monetary and fiscal priorities to support the sustainable growth, and just now on this very panel, we touched on the power of ASEAN regional collaboration and partnership. And we sort of saw how the confidence are quite high in this room. Hopefully it gets bigger and higher tomorrow. And let's use this opportunity for photo session. All the gentlemen, let's show your smile as a symbol of, confidence. Yes, 3, 2, 1. Once again, would like to thank all speakers and the moderator for this last session of the day. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a big round of applause. And all speakers, moderator, you may return to your seat.